Arby's is quite a restaurant. I'm about to talk about so many rises and falls, not just typical fluctuations, major ones that they've experienced over the years. It's frankly unbelievable, but it gets crazy. Regardless, let's start off slow from the beginning. There were these two guys. They were brothers named Leroy and Forrest Raffel. They're usually referred to as the Raffel Brothers, like how we have the Coen brothers, but instead of making movies, these two were in the restaurant business. In the 1940s, they both graduated from college, one with a degree in finance, and the other with a degree in hotel and restaurant administration. Sounds like a good pair to start a restaurant. But they didn't do it right away. In the 1950s, they bought a business from their uncle that dealt with restaurant equipment. If you were starting or remodeling a restaurant at the time, you could call them up and they'd provide you with your stove or fryers or whatever you needed. They'd even help you in designing the kitchen layout and install everything for you. As you would imagine, they were very tuned in to the industry. They saw firsthand, and before many others, how the fast food part of it was growing. This is the crazy story of Arby's. Before we start the video, please support the channel by hitting the subscribe and like button, and also share the video. Thanks for watching. It was the early 1960s. McDonald's was becoming a household name, and there were a bunch of other businesses popping up. I guess you could say trying to be the next McDonald's. Though the Raffel Brothers saw this as an attractive new industry, they also recognized the level of competition. You don't want to compete with McDonald's, and you don't want to compete with everyone trying to be McDonald's. So, they tried to sidestep that competition a bit and make themselves different by specializing in roast beef sandwiches. It was a different menu item, but also a more expensive one. In the beginning, their roast beef sandwiches were almost 5 times the price of a McDonald's hamburger. It was a way to become a more indirect competitor by attracting a different, more adult, possibly higher income customer. The first Arby's went up in July of 1964 in the small town of Boardman, Ohio. Just to give you an idea of the geography, the restaurant equipment business was headquartered in the bordering town of Youngstown, Ohio. That first location did pretty well. So I'm thinking the Raffel Brothers recognized an opportunity to expand and the pressure to do it fast before the industry became saturated and there was no room left for them to do it. I say this because within 3 years of opening that first location, there were now 100 locations. 3 years after that, by the end of the decade, there were 300, not just in Ohio, across 37 states. Now, the obvious question is, how did they possibly do all of this fast? And the answer is, a lot of debt and franchising and private investors. But yeah, a lot of debt. To this point, it seems like the plan was to expand by any means necessary. Then, once they're large and established enough, they'd be able to have a successful initial public offering, sell the company on the stock market, and use that money just to clean things up. It didn't go well. They had some bad luck with things happening in the market, and the IPO never happened, meaning they didn't get the cash that they were counting on. And that's when things went bad. They couldn't afford to pay their loans, and they couldn't afford to operate their business. The bank literally cut them off, which put a strain on the company. This strain prevented Arby's from providing much-needed support to the franchisees. So, in return, the franchisees stopped giving them their cut of the sales. It was bad news. A company of this size needs a lot of money to operate, and they already used all their funds building their business to this size. And really, what can you do at this point? After a few months of struggling like this, they finally filed for bankruptcy. The whole thing was a major setback, but not the end, obviously. The Raffel Brothers remained in control and spent the next 5 years restoring it. By 1975, they were back on track with 500 locations that were overall profitable. Now they were back on the offense, and there was still pressure to expand while that opportunity was still there. However, the brothers were very fearful after their first experience of almost failing. They did not want to mess things up again. They didn't want to go into heavy debt, and they didn't trust the stock market would work out after their first experience. So they took a different approach. The idea was if they were to merge with a larger company, they could use their resources to help build Arby's. So, in 1976, the Raffel Brothers sold their entire business to RC Cola for $18 million, and they remained in charge. Really a fantastic deal for them. They now had the funding they needed, still controlled the company, and not to mention $18 million in their pockets. And that's how Arby's existed for the next 3 years, and things were good. By 1979, they were up to 800 locations that were still said to be overall profitable. 1979 marks the end of the Raffel Brothers' involvement. They decided to step away, retire, and let RC Cola take full control of their creation. And as soon as they left, RC Cola messed everything up. Do you remember how genius it was to separate themselves from McDonald's and everyone else by selling roast beef instead of hamburgers? Well, now they started selling hamburgers. I don't know exactly why. Maybe they saw potential in the bigger market, but we can all see how straying away from what made you unique and popular in the first place is not the best idea. Sales fell. They started blending in with everyone else, and that was their existence for the next 5 years. But in 1984, the whole company of RC Cola, including Arby's, was bought by this guy, Victor Posner, who switched up Arby's management. The new management cut out all that hamburger nonsense, made a few other changes, and essentially brought them back. By the late 1980s, they were opening new locations faster than ever. Now, this new owner, Victor Posner, seems to have hired a good management team. But his intentions with the company were questionable. He was a 67-year-old billionaire known for his long history of hostile takeovers and leveraged buyouts. Not long after he bought RC Cola, he was found guilty of tax evasion and accused of insider trading. This guy is fascinating, but probably not the person you want around your business. The management and franchisees accused him of not acting in the best interest of the company, essentially pocketing cash from it instead of reinvesting it. It got so bad to where it came to a point where the management and the franchisees tried to come together and buy the company. He refused to sell it, and soon after, many of them either quit or were fired, and the ones who remained did not have a great relationship with him. I think it's safe to say that all of this drama behind the scenes and the questionable motives from the owner caused Arby's to slip again. In 1993, Victor Posner was being investigated for his, I guess you would call it, long history of shady dealings, and it didn't end well for him. He was forced to step away and get rid of the company that owned Arby's. The end result was the creation of a new company called Triarch. They now owned and controlled Arby's with yet another management team. From here, things started improving again. Throughout the 1990s, Triarch was selling its businesses that were unrelated to the food and drinks and increasing their involvement in the food and drink businesses. To give you a sense of how big Triarch was, they played a significant role in the drink conglomerate Snapple. Eventually, they got rid of Snapple and almost everything else except for Arby's. In 2008, now focused almost entirely on fast food, Triarch bought Wendy's. It was a $2.34 billion deal that brought Arby's and Wendy's together. Soon after, Triarch changed their name to Wendy's Arby's Group. My goodness, I told you, there's a lot of changes. Let's keep going into the more modern era. Those years that they spent joined with Wendy's weren't too good for Arby's. When the economy went down in 2008, it was bad news for them. They were deep in the negative every year, much more than the rest of the industry. Just look at Wendy's, for example. They took a hit, but nothing like Arby's. With Arby's slipping so much, they decided to sell 81.5% of Arby's to a private equity firm for $430 million. The reasoning for them selling it was, it allowed them to focus more on their stronger chain. The new owners of Arby's are now called Inspire Brands, and that's where they remain today, and things seem to be getting better. An article from Forbes in 2017 said they've grown same-store sales for 14 straight quarters, outperforming the rest of the industry, and some of these are their best quarters ever, which is really good, especially compared to how they were doing. They started doing this thing where they would introduce new menu items at a very cheap purchase price, and then gradually raise the price, while closely monitoring how it performed. If it met a certain requirement, they would keep it on the menu, otherwise they would move on to something else. This led to a bunch of successful products, like Euros and their brisket sandwich. Also, marketing has been a big part of their comeback. They've spent a lot of money on it. I'm sure you know their slogan, Arby's, we have the meats, which has been their biggest campaign. Also, they've started playful Twitter beefs with celebrities to stir up attention for their brand. Jon Stewart, back when he was hosting The Daily Show, would make fun of Arby's. Then, Arby's would come back and respond in their own humorous ways, embracing the joke. Another pop culture moment for them included rapper Pharrell and his infamous hat. Remember in 2014, he wore this crazy looking thing to the Grammys. Arby's tweeted about it, saying they wanted their hat back. Well, a few months later, they bought it from him on eBay for $44,000, just to get people to talk about Arby's. It's also worth mentioning that in 2017, they bought Buffalo Wild Wings, and in 2018, they bought Sonic. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about all of these moving parts? What do you think about Arby's in general? I'm curious. Has your experience with this restaurant correlated with these rises and falls? For example, maybe you disliked them 10 years ago, but have since come around. I understand there's so much here, so I hope I did a good job in profiling all these ups and downs. Also, can you believe that I just spent all this time talking about Arby's without mentioning the curly fries? That's my favorite thing from there. I guess I'll save that for another time. So, until then, please support the channel by hitting the subscribe and like button, and also share the video. Thanks for watching.